Hello, and welcome once again to another episode of Inside the World of MACK'S Headroom. Tonight I have a very lighthearted topic to talk about. Should get lots of laughs. But that is the subject of what's commonly called chemical castration. No, there's no laughs here. I'm really serious. I want to talk about chemical castration. And the reason that is, it's severalfold actually, but the main reason is that on the YouTube platform, there's, a lot of discussions about all kinds of aspects of the notion of child abuse and pedophilia. And, you know, everybody talks about it, but yet there isn't a whole lot about what you do about it. All you hear people say is, they need treatment, they need therapy, they need counseling, they need this, they need that, they need a pop squad. I mean, I don't know what the fuck people say, but there's actually a very special way of going about helping someone who they don't even have to admit it at the beginning. But someone who is pedophilic and needs help, as I think all pedophiles do, whether they're a virtuous pedophile and have never offended before, or whether they're a chronic, ongoing offender that's ordered by the court. It doesn't really matter. I think everybody that's pedophilic needs some kind of help, but that help needs to be very specialized. And that's a whole subject unto itself. And maybe I'll talk some more about some of the various aspects of the treatment of sexual abusers, because I spent 30 years working with all kinds of sex offenders. I also had my practice also was part family therapy as well, but a lot of that was incest. And so I have a great deal of knowledge about sexual offending, the treatment of sexual offending, the ideology of it, blah, 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 what needs to happen in the future. I got a lot of ideas. But it's not a real pleasant subject, so I don't know that I want my channel to be, defined as, the pedophile treatment channel, But so one reason is there's just a lot of interest on YouTube, but yet there's very little input about what you do with these folks. It's only what the problem is and what a problem it presents. But rarely is there anything talked about what you do about it. Okay, so that's kind of my goal by just starting with the notion of probably one of the easiest interventions in the world, which is what's commonly called chemical castration. Now, in a minute, I'm going to get around to the notion that I think that that's a really piss poor way of referring to it. But I'll get to that in a second. The main reason that I think chemical castration is looked at more as like a punishment than a treatment aid has to do with a lot of mythology that's urban mythology that's present by people who don't really know much about sex offending, and they give it the big thumbs down. Oftentimes because it's like invading in someone's deepest private part of their, self-determination, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of people will say, well, I mean, yeah, you can keep a guy from getting an erection, but what's that going to do with his mouth? And what's that going to do with the crazy thoughts he has in his head? And what's that going to do every time he looks at one of my little daughter when I'm walking down the street? Well, you see, that's the big myth about chemical castration. It really isn't any of that. And I'm going to try to explain to you what exactly it is. But before I do, I want to try to explain, what chemical castration is. But by doing that, I want to try to rename it. Because, chemical castration has such a punitive notion that, such a punitive connotation that anybody, thinking of taking it, must have horrid, thoughts about that entering into such a treatment process. And it really isn't castrating, because when you castrate someone, that's it. They're gone. You can never do anything again. Well, with with so-called chemical castration, or what I'm going to call the use of anti-androgen agents, it only works as long as the medication is stable. So that's one big difference that punctures a lot of people's views of what chemical castration is. I mean, it's not a permanent fix. It can be if the person feels they need to use the medication for a maintenance period of time, um, but it's not always used that way. But I think it's one of the most efficacious things you can do to help a sex offender stop feeling so oppressed by his pedophilic and deviant impulses and urges. It's one of the quickest things you can do. As a matter of fact, in Canada, a lot of the jail treatment programs. Canada's a very progressive country when it comes to the treatment of sex offenses. They're also some of the most punitive, but in terms of being, very fast acting and putting guys in jail real quick, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They're also some of the most reasonable in terms of offering treatment services and shortening sentences if people, show a good-hearted effort in entering treatment. So anyway, I think it's a terrible word to use, and I would rather call it something else. I would call it medically assisted deviant arousal control, MADAC, MADAC. I just made that up, but I think at least it detoxifies a little bit of the idea of what actually the use of anti-androgen agents is. Let's try it again. Medically assisted deviant arousal control, MADAC, MADAC. Kind of sounds like Mac, doesn't it? So anyway, let me explain to you a little bit about what anti-androgen agents, or MADAC, really does, so everybody understands. Okay, so you can get through this urban mythology about what it is, and this goes for anybody who's pedophilic, like the so-called virtuous pedophiles, people who haven't offended, which I have some reservations about that whole notion, but nonetheless, if it exists, and there's a lot of people that say it does, I would say that this could be a very helpful medication to use. For the people who are not offending and struggling with it and doing what they call an AA talk, like white knuckling it, just not doing it, or not putting themselves in the presence of children, or, warning their neighbors, that they're, aroused to children and they should be careful. I mean, that's like what you call white knuckling it. But anti-androgen agents will absolutely help that, because you see, when what an anti-androgen agent does is it inhibits the production of testosterone. And testosterone is like the gas that drives sex and libido, period, in males. Okay, let's be real clear. We're talking about males today, okay? And so once you dampen, quell, or eliminate, depending on how big the dosage is, that flow of testosterone, you knock out one's sex drive. I don't care what you're attracted to. You don't feel and you don't fantasize and you don't think about sex. I one time saw a video about the use of anti-androgen agents in the Canadian jail. And some of these guys were like, it was like their fourth offense and they were in there forever. But they have these special units so they don't put the child molesters in with the general population often. And so they were interviewing this one guy, and he just said, "Boy, you have no idea what it's like to not have to masturbate 5 times a day." That's kind of a funny statement, isn't it? Well, thing is that pedophilia is a hypersexual act, hypersexual habit, and so a lot of these guys are very oversexed and can't stop thinking about sex, let alone sex with children. You see, so if you can knock out the amount of testosterone that's being put into, or that's being produced inside a male organism, then you're going to either dampen or eliminate their sex drive altogether. That includes their ability to get an erection, their ability to be interested in sex, their ability to fantasize about sex because there's no interest, there's no libido, or it's dampened. It depends how big the dose is and how serious the person's problem is. But this guy that I heard, talking about how helpful it was to have anti-androgen agents, he said, I can just survive in jail better because I don't feel so compelled to masturbate to themes that I don't think are supposed to be very appropriate for me. But I can't help it. I'm like driven. As soon as I got this medication, bang, I'm so much more relaxed. I'm so much more better. Now you could say, oh, he's just a chomo and he's bullshitting, but there's enough research to show that anti-androgen agents are extremely helpful. So let's understand that, it's not a matter of inhibiting your erectile response. It's not a matter of the fact they're still going to have deviant fantasies. When you knock out the testosterone, or like I said, dampen it significantly, you will eliminate one's desire to have sex, actually. Um, so there's two basic models that the use of anti-androgen agents, are structured into. And it's actually, I made that tape, which I guess was a little bit pro-methadone maintenance about opiate tapering and stuff. But it's a lot like the philosophy of methadone maintenance. In other words, and also it's the epitome of a harm reduction effort. I mean, let's not forget something, okay? We're we're talking about kids, your kids. Well, not my kid, he's kind of old, but any of you that have younger children, we're talking about preventing them from significantly, by a significant number, if you've got enough of these guys on that medication, from being abused. So it's the true harm reductionistic way of going about things. It's designed to protect society, and it also helps the offender in a lot of ways. So the two different models is to introduce, say, Depo-Provera or another anti-androgen agent early in treatment, and then teach them or train them, however you want to put it, in specialized sexual offender treatment while they don't have a tremendous amount of sex drive. But once they acquire the tools and extinguish some of the previously held deviant sexual arousal patterns, they may be able to wean off it. And then you can start doing, reorientation training if you want. But the other way of doing it is to look at it like a maintenance drug. I mean, society has such a terrible attitude about the extended use of drugs. But yeah, what if you have diabetes? You got to take insulin for the rest of your life. What happens if you have high blood pressure? Well, I guess there's some things you can do, with your lifestyle, but you're going to have to take high blood pressure medication. Medication's medication. So I would say the trade-off of someone being on a medication that, one, makes them feel much more in control of themselves, and two, helps your and my kids from getting abused as frequently, or not as frequently, that's kind of a bad way to say it, but the likelihood, to decrease the likelihood of the average kid being abused, because there's people out there that are, deviantly oriented who now don't have like a sex drive, period. And then they can go on and have productive lives and not be such a threat to everybody. The biggest problem actually with the use of anti-androgen agents, or what do they call it? MADAC? Yeah. MADAC is actually, in the United States, is that doctors don't like to prescribe it. And I interacted with so many doctors trying to get them to join my program, even, like as a 1099 employee, just to administer anti-androgen agents. And I was only able to find a couple. But most of them are just real nervous about kind of breaking this liberal taboo of taking one's self-determination to have sex at their desire taken away by an external force. Now, that's a nice liberal way of looking at things, but when you're talking about children's lives and stuff, I don't think that enters the equation very much. But unfortunately, because it is a controversial subject, a lot of physicians, psychiatrists will just not do it. Or if they want to get business, they'll say, oh yeah, I'll look into it, because really all you got to do is take a weekend course if you're a physician and learn how it's used and how to dose it and that kind of thing, and that's it. I mean, that's all they really have to do. It's no big deal. But they just don't seem to like to do it. And to show you the extent that many, especially psychiatrists, would go to get the business and work with my program, but yet not have to give out anti-androgen agents, is they'd say, well, look, Mac, you know, Paxil. One of the horrible things about Paxil, you know, Paxil is like one of the older school SSRI inhibitors, much like Prozac would be, right? And they'd say, you know, well, Mac, you know, you may not know this or not. Yeah, sure, I don't know it. I've taken Paxil, I know it, you know. But I mean, you know, oh, one of the secrets about Paxil is that you know, one of the side effects is that it decreases your sexual interest. You have what's called a decrease in sexual interest. Now, does that mean it decreases your testosterone? Absolutely not. It just means that there's a side effect that makes you have a little bit of a ejaculatory problem and a bit of an erectile problem, and you may lose a little bit of your interest in sex, but it's definitely not like anti-androgen agents, where you're talking about shifting the sex hormone around so that the person isn't plagued by it. And that it was awful because it never worked. Oh, you know, at times when I couldn't get a doctor to write for anti-androgen agents, you know, yeah, we'll go the Paxil route. You know, every one of those guys that was on Paxil didn't do very well whatsoever, or at least no better than the average client. It was a waste, and most of them wanted to stop taking it. And it wasn't because they had a decrease in sexual arousal. It was just the fact that they didn't like the side effects other than the decrease in sexual arousal, like the feeling that if any of you have taken Paxil, you know, a lot of you might feel like it makes you real tired. Sometimes it makes you feel like you're going out of your body, like your body's vibrating. These are all kinds of side effects you have of it. So, you know, these guys didn't like that feeling, and they'd find all kinds of excuses to get them off of it. But see, one of the problems with prescribing a drug to, say, a court-ordered client, you can't do it. You can't order him to do it. He has to volunteer. You can't make your program contingent upon him taking a drug. You follow? You just can't do it. It's one of those human rights things. You can't force somebody to take medication. You can get him to agree, and you can educate him about it and explain it and try to frame it in a way that makes him understand that not only we help the community and future victims, but he's going to be a lot more relaxed because he's not going to have a monkey on his back, much like a junkie would have. So, you know, I'm really in favor of this. Now, keep in mind that, you know, the using anti-androgen agents, as I mentioned before, can be used as part of a treatment program. But I actually believe it could be helpful even if, let's say, these virtuous pedophiles, if they exist, and I'm going to leave a question mark on that one because I don't know. It's new to me, and I've been led to believe that it's very hard for someone to exert such self-control to identify themselves to the public as a pedophile and yet not act on the impulse. It just doesn't work that way. I don't know, but they say it does, and if that's the case, well, they still need treatment because you can only white knuckle yourself through something for so long before you're going to find yourself at a time of vulnerability and give in. But if there's a chemical in your body that doesn't allow you to give in that way, then it seems like a pretty good solution to me. So again, you know, keep in mind that whatever loss of you know, the ability to be sexual in certain individuals that need maybe to have the ability to be sexual taken away completely, or taken away until they can master you know, specialized sexual offender treatment and be, you know, pretty, I don't know if there's ever a guarantee, but feel pretty confident that you know, they can control their urges and stuff once off the Depo-Provera. And of course, you never take them off the Depo-Provera and then send them out the door. I mean, you might have them off the Depo-Provera for a year and see how it's going, and maybe they'll go back on it. But it's really a help. So I want to try to detoxify the notion of so-called chemical castration, and we'll refer back to it as MADAC, medically assisted deviant arousal control, which I think is a much nicer way of looking at it. And I guess that's about it. I hope you found this informative. I hope that it opens your minds a little bit to the fact that there's some optimism involved in the treatment of pedophilia. And don't fall prey to those notions that, Oh, Depo-Provera, you know, it keeps him from getting an erection. Oh, big deal. What's going on in his head? That's what it's really about. It's not. When you decrease the amount of testosterone in the body through anti-androgen agents, you lose your libido. Or depending on the dose, like I said before, if you take a little bit, if you just dampen the libido because the person isn't that embroiled in pedophilia, then you know, you might use less. But it is very helpful, and I just thought I'd want to share that with you all. And maybe I'll do some more tapes on some of the other things you do with sexual offending. You know, there's a whole big movement now about trying to free up some of the confidentiality restrictions that therapists have, which actually prevent sexually abusive people from coming into treatment until they're arrested. And I think that that is a really good point that I'd also like to discuss. There's a lot of people talking about it. It's not like it's new. Matter of fact, I think it's in Finland or something. They've removed the mandated reporter act if a person comes in asking for help. Now, I'm not saying I'm one way or the other about that, but maybe in the future I'd like to talk about that as well, because you have to create a climate for people to come and ask for help, other than the way that most people ask for help, which is they get busted, they've already created some damage, and then they're in the court system and ordered, which is just not as good as people being able to, especially these alleged virtuous pedophiles. You know, if such a thing exists, I think that it's a wonderful way for these guys to you know, curb their deviant arousal and not offend and keep up with what they say they are. So that's about it. Thanks for listening. A shout out to my friend Katie, who gave me a little bit of inspiration to do this tape today, because I tried to do another one on a different subject and I kept falling on my head and I couldn't do it. And I chatted with her and blah, blah, blah. She said, oh, try it. I said, okay, I'll do it. So here I am, and thank you, Katie. And thank you, my 1 million viewers. And leave your comment sections below. I'd be really curious to see what you think about this, and the angle that I've taken a look at it. I'd really be very, very interested to know. So with that, I say goodbye, and thank you once again for watching another episode of Inside the World of Max Headroom. Good night. Oops.